My name is Alina. I'm 32 years old. The dependable daughter. The practical one. The one who never needed rescuing. Which is probably why no one noticed when I was the one drowning. The day my father kicked me out, he didn't yell. He didn't slam a door. He simply placed a white envelope on the dining table between us and said, calmly, almost politely, "You have 48 hours. That was it. 48 hours to pack up my life. 48 hours to leave the house I helped keep standing." I remember staring at the envelope. My name typed neatly in black ink. Not handwritten. Typed. Like I was a tenant, not a daughter. Across the table, my younger brother Saad scrolled through his phone like he wasn't listening. My stepmother adjusted her bracelet and avoided eye contact. The ceiling fan hummed like nothing unusual was happening. "This house needs restructuring," my father continued. "We've decided Saad and his fiancée will move into your floor. They need the space." Need. I almost laughed. I had lived in that upstairs portion for 6 years. Paid utilities. Covered half the property tax when Dad's business slowed down. I repainted the walls myself after the water damage. Fixed the broken stair rail. Replaced the water heater when it burst at 2 a.m. But apparently I didn't need it. Saad finally looked up. "It's not personal," he said casually. "It just makes sense." Makes sense. 48 hours. I didn't argue. That's the strange part. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just nodded and said, "Okay." Because I've spent my whole life being the reasonable one. After my mother died when I was 19, I stepped into spaces that weren't mine. Cooked dinners. Managed bills. Sat with Dad while he stared at old photographs. When he remarried 2 years later, I told everyone I was happy for him. I meant it. Mostly. When Saad dropped out of college, I was the one who paid his car insurance for 8 months. When Dad's hardware store nearly closed, I emptied my savings to keep the electricity running. He called me his backbone. Apparently, backbones are replaceable. That night, I went upstairs and looked around my room. The room where I studied for my nursing exams. The window where I used to sit with tea after 12-hour hospital shifts. The dent in the wall from when I slipped carrying furniture. Everything in that space had my fingerprints on it. And now I was being told I didn't belong. I sat on the edge of my bed and did the math. 6 years of rent payments. Not cheap ones either. 6 years of temporary help that turned permanent. I never signed a formal lease. "We're family," Dad had said when I suggested paperwork. Family. Funny how that word disappears when property is involved. At 10:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was my boyfriend, Imran. "How did dinner go?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "I have 48 hours to move out." 3 dots appeared immediately. "What?" I called him. He didn't interrupt while I explained. Didn't jump in with solutions. He just listened. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Alina," he said gently, "why do they always expect you to be the flexible one?" I didn't have an answer. Because I always had been. Because I didn't complain. Because I handled things. Because I didn't break. Maybe that was my mistake. Downstairs, I could hear laughter. Saad showing his fiancée videos of how they'd redecorate their new space. My space. I opened my closet and pulled out a suitcase. Not in panic. Not in rage. But with a clarity that felt unfamiliar. If I had 48 hours, I would use them. Not to beg. Not to negotiate. But to understand something. For years, I thought being strong meant absorbing pressure quietly. Maybe strength meant something else. Maybe it meant leaving. As I folded my clothes, I realized something unsettling. They didn't think I'd resist. They thought I'd adjust. Find a rental. Smile politely at family dinners. Continue sending money when asked. They weren't kicking me out. They were repositioning me. Demoting me from daughter to convenience. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted that role anymore. I zipped the suitcase closed and looked around the room one more time. 48 hours. My father thought he was removing me from a floor plan. He didn't realize he was removing me from his safety net. And once I left, I wasn't coming back the same. The morning after the envelope, the house felt different. Not hostile. Worse. Casual. Like I had already left. Saad was measuring the upstairs hallway with a tape measure when I came down for coffee. Just checking where the crib might go, he said, not looking at me.
Crib. Right.
His fiancée, Miriam, was 3 months pregnant. That was the urgency. That was the justification. I nodded slowly and poured coffee into the mug I bought when the old set chipped. The same mug my stepmother once called too plain. Plain had always been my aesthetic. Predictable. Functional. Replaceable. Dad sat at the head of the table reading the newspaper, like we were in some 1950s sitcom. You'll manage, he said without looking up. Manage. I had managed his grief. Managed the mortgage when business was slow. Managed the broken plumbing when no plumber showed up. Managed Saad's forgotten responsibilities. But this wasn't something I was going to manage quietly. I went back upstairs and opened my laptop. For 6 years, I kept records. Not because I planned to use them. Not because I distrusted anyone. It was just how I was wired. Spreadsheets calm me. Numbers tell the truth when people don't. Utilities I covered, $14,200 total. Property tax contributions, $9,800. Emergency repairs, $6,350. Groceries during Dad's slow seasons, impossible to calculate. I stared at the totals. Then I opened another folder. Bank transfers to Saad. $300 for his car repair. $500 temporary loan when he wanted to invest in crypto. $1,200 when Miriam's event planning course just needed one more payment. He never repaid a single dollar. I never asked, because family doesn't invoice. Except apparently, family does evict. Around noon, Dad knocked on my door. He didn't wait for permission before entering. You've always been independent, he said carefully. You don't need this house. There it was. The logic. You don't need. As if stability were a privilege awarded to the weakest sibling. I paid rent. I replied evenly. He shifted. Yes, but below market. Because you're my father, I wanted to say. Instead, I said, how much below? He hesitated. Market rent for the upper floor in our area was about $1,800. I paid $950. Half. I had always thought it was generous of him. Now it felt strategic. Saad and Miriam can't afford market either, he added. But this way it stays in the family. In the family. I almost asked him what that made me. A guest? A placeholder? Temporary scaffolding? Instead, I asked, did you consider discussing this before deciding? He sighed, irritated now. We knew you'd make it complicated. Complicated. Meaning, I might have boundaries. After he left, I stared at the wall. I painted a soft gray 2 years ago. Bought the paint myself. Fixed the cracked plaster underneath. Installed new light fixtures. Every improvement added value to the property. Value I would never see again. It hit me then. This wasn't sudden. This had been building quietly. Last month, Dad asked me to sign something for insurance records. I skimmed it. Trusted him. It had the company name at the top, Ramon Property Holdings, LLC. I hadn't thought much of it. Now I pulled the document from my drawer. It wasn't insurance paperwork. It was an acknowledgement of tenancy under the LLC, which meant something important. This wasn't just a father asking a daughter to move. This was a landlord serving notice. My pulse slowed. 48 hours. That's not legal notice in this state. I opened a government housing website and started reading. 30 days minimum for month-to-month tenants. 60 in some cases. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since the envelope slid across the table. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was thinking clearly. Downstairs, laughter again. Miriam's voice echoing through the hallway. They were planning furniture. Planning paint colors. Planning my replacement. They assumed I'd leave quietly, because I always had. But here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't just the reliable one. I was the observant one. And I had documentation. That evening, Saad knocked lightly on my door. Hey, he said, Softer than usual. Don't make this weird.
Weird.
I folded another sweater into a box. You're getting my floor, I said. Nothing about that is normal. He shifted uncomfortably. It's temporary. Once I'm stable. You've been saying that for 8 years.
His jaw tightened.
You've always resented me.
No.
I had carried him. That's not resentment. That's exhaustion. I don't resent you, I said quietly. I resent the expectation.
He didn't respond.
He just walked away. That night, I didn't pack. I organized. Receipts. Transfers. Text messages. The acknowledgement form with the LLC letterhead. If they wanted to treat me like a tenant, fine. I would respond like one. 48 hours wasn't a deadline. It was a test. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to pass it by being agreeable. I was going to pass it by being unmovable. Saturday afternoon, Dad called for a family discussion. He used that tone. The diplomatic one. The one he used when customers argued over hardware prices. The living room looked staged. Curtains drawn halfway. Tea set out. Miriam sitting upright beside Saad like she was attending a board meeting instead of claiming someone else's space. I walked in carrying a slim black folder. Not dramatic.
Not bulky.
Just organized. Dad cleared his throat. We don't want tension, he began. We're family. There it was again. Family. Which apparently meant comply quietly. I agree, I said calmly. So, let's talk clearly. Saad leaned back in the armchair that used to be mine. There's nothing to talk about. We just need the upstairs.
Need.
I placed the folder on the coffee table, but didn't open it yet. 48 hours isn't legal notice, I said evenly. The room shifted. Dad blinked.
What?
I'm a month-to-month tenant under Ramon Property Holdings, LLC. You had me sign acknowledgement paperwork last month. Minimum 30 days notice is required in this state. Silence. Miriam's fingers tightened around her teacup. Saad looked at Dad. Dad looked at me. You wouldn't actually fight this, he said slowly.
Fight.
Why is self-respect always framed as aggression? I'm not fighting, I replied. I'm clarifying. I opened the folder and slid a printed copy of the housing statute across the table. Then copies of my payment history. Utilities. Property tax contributions. Repair invoices.
Dates. Amounts.
Transfers. The numbers spoke calmly. You paid below market, Dad said sharply. Yes, I agreed. And I invested above obligation. Saad scoffed. You're making this transactional. I looked at him. You made it transactional when you replaced me. The words landed harder than I expected. Miriam shifted uncomfortably. Dad stood up abruptly. So, what do you want? He demanded. That was the moment. The real one. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't scrambling to keep peace. I wasn't calculating how to soften the blow. I knew exactly what I wanted. I want proper notice, I said. In writing. 30 days minimum. And I want reimbursement for the water heater replacement and electrical rewiring. I have receipts. Saad laughed in disbelief. You're charging Dad now? No, I said calmly. I'm separating roles. That confused them. Good. For years, I continued, I was daughter and tenant and financial backup and unpaid contractor. You blurred the lines. I'm unblurring them. Dad's voice dropped. You're being ungrateful. That word again. Ungrateful for what? A discounted rent that came with emotional leverage? A roof I helped maintain? I'm being precise, I corrected. The room felt different now. Not loud. Tense. Controlled. Miriam finally spoke. We're starting a family, she said softly. We just need stability. I looked at her for a long moment. And I don't. She didn't answer. Because that was the core of it. My stability had always been considered optional. Assumed. Guaranteed. Because I was strong. Strong people, apparently, don't require security. Dad exhaled heavily. If we give you 30 days, you'll leave quietly? There it was. The real concern. Not fairness. Not legality. Reputation. I met his eyes. I will leave with dignity, I said. Not quietly. He didn't understand the difference. Saad leaned forward. You're overreacting. It's just space.
No.
It wasn't. It was positioning. Hierarchy. Message. It was being told you're valuable only when convenient. I stood up slowly. You raised me to handle things responsibly, I said. I'm doing that now. Dad's shoulders slumped slightly. For a brief second, I saw something flicker in his expression. Not anger. Not dominance. Uncertainty. He wasn't used to me pushing back. He was used to me absorbing. 30 days, he said finally. Written. I nodded once. And we'll discuss reimbursement, he added reluctantly.
Progress. Small.
But real. As I picked up my folder, Saad muttered under his breath, This changes things.
Yes, it did.
Because something fundamental had shifted. For years, I thought strength meant carrying weight silently. But real strength? It's redistribution. It's saying, this portion is yours. This burden is not mine. That night, alone in my room, I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt steady, like a structure that had finally been reinforced properly. 30 days. Not 48 hours. Not forced displacement. Not silent compliance. For the first time, I had negotiated my own exit. And somehow that felt more powerful than staying. But what they didn't realize yet was that leaving wasn't the end of the shift. It was the beginning. Once the 30 days were official, written, signed, emailed, something inside me went quiet. Not broken. Not defeated. Quiet like a machine finally powered down. For the first week, the house felt like neutral territory. Dad avoided unnecessary conversations. Saad stayed upstairs less, almost like he didn't want to cross invisible lines. Miriam stopped talking about paint colors in front of me. But tension lingered in small ways. Cabinet doors closed softer. Footsteps paused outside my room. No one asked how I was doing. That would have required acknowledgement. Instead, Dad started making small comments. You'll save money renting something smaller. You're capable. You'll land on your feet. They sounded like compliments. They weren't. They were justifications. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't explain myself. I packed methodically, box by box, not in anger but in clarity. I donated half my clothes, sold the dining table I'd bought during my second year of nursing, gave away the armchair I once called my decompression throne. Every object I removed felt symbolic. This house had been an extension of my labor, and now I was reclaiming it. Imran came over one evening with takeout. He watched me label a box, kitchen mine. You're calmer than I expected, he said carefully. I'm done expecting fairness, I replied. I'm choosing structure instead. He smiled faintly. That sounds like growth. It felt like detachment. And detachment isn't cold. It's clean. One afternoon, Dad knocked again. This time he waited. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside. He stood awkwardly near the window, hands behind his back. I didn't think you'd respond like this, he admitted. Respond like what? Like someone who isn't afraid of losing us. There it was. The core. He thought my fear of disconnection would keep me compliant.
It used to.
Dad, I said gently, you made it clear that security here wasn't guaranteed. That's not what I meant, but it's what you did. He looked older suddenly.
Not weak.
Just confronted. I thought you'd understand, he said quietly. You're strong. That word again. Strong. I took a slow breath. Being strong doesn't mean being disposable.
He didn't respond.
Because there was no argument against that. After he left, I sat on my mattress, now without a frame, and stared at the bare walls. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel it. Not anger. Not revenge.
Grief.
Not for the house. For the illusion. I had believed my reliability secured my place. But reliability doesn't guarantee belonging. Boundaries do. 2 weeks before my move-out date, I signed a lease for a small one-bedroom apartment across town. No shared walls with family. No emotional expectations attached. Market rent. Paid fully by me. When I handed over the deposit, something inside me shifted again. This wasn't escape.
It was autonomy.
The final week passed quietly. Dad transferred partial reimbursement for the water heater and wiring. Not full, but enough to acknowledge reality. Saad barely spoke to me. Miriam offered a tight smile in passing. On my last night, I walked through the upstairs slowly, touched the door frame I'd repaired, ran my fingers along the smooth wall I'd sanded and painted. This place had my fingerprints everywhere, but it no longer had my permission. That distinction mattered. The next morning, I carried my final box downstairs. Dad stood near the entrance. He looked like he wanted to say something meaningful. He didn't. Instead, he said, "You know you're always welcome." I almost smiled. Not out of sarcasm. Out of clarity. "Under what terms?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. Because now he understood. Access to me wasn't automatic anymore. I stepped outside. Closed the door gently. Not slammed. Not dramatic. Just final. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Not because I was angry, but because I was done positioning myself for approval. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the family's safety net. I wasn't the fallback plan. I wasn't the emotional infrastructure. I was just
Me.
and that felt terrifying and powerful at the same time. The first night in my new apartment was quiet. Not the tense quiet of holding back words. Not the careful quiet of trying not to disturb anyone. Just quiet. The refrigerator hummed softly. A car passed outside. Somewhere upstairs, someone laughed. No one needed me. No one expected anything. I stood in the center of the living room surrounded by unopened boxes and realized something strange. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt unassigned. For years, my identity had been functional. Problem solver. Financial buffer. Emotional stabilizer. Without those roles, I felt undefined. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat down and wrote. Not a to-do list. Not a budget. A question. If no one needs you to carry them, who are you? The answer didn't come immediately. But over the next few weeks, pieces began forming. I stopped sending money automatically. That was the first shift. 3 days after I moved, Saad texted. "Hey, property tax bill came. You still pitching in?" I stared at the message for a long time. Old reflexes flared. Then I typed. "I'm no longer a resident or financial contributor to that property." Simple.
Clear.
He didn't reply. 2 weeks later, Dad emailed. The hardware store was struggling again.
Slow season.
"If you can help temporarily, it would mean a lot." That sentence used to undo me. Used to trigger guilt. Used to feel like duty. This time, I read it twice. Then responded. "I'm focusing on stabilizing my own finances right now. I wish you the best." I didn't over-explain. Didn't apologize. Didn't soften. And something extraordinary happened. The world didn't collapse. No dramatic fallout. No shouting calls. Just silence. And in that silence, something powerful grew.
Space.
Without constant financial leaks, my savings began accumulating faster than they ever had. I picked up extra hospital shifts, not out of obligation but strategy. I enrolled in a specialized certification course I'd postponed for years because family needed help. I stopped saying yes to things that drained me. Imran noticed the difference. "You seem lighter," he said one evening. "I'm not carrying invisible weight anymore," I replied. 3 months after moving out, I received a promotion opportunity. Clinical supervisor position. More responsibility. Higher pay. Old me would have hesitated. What if Dad needed help again? What if Saad asked for something urgent? What if I became too busy for family? New me asked a different question. Does this move me forward?
Yes. So I applied.
And I got it. The salary increase wasn't life-changing overnight, but it was symbolic. It represented something fundamental. Progress built on self-priority. Around that same time, I heard through extended relatives that things at the house weren't smooth. The upstairs bathroom developed mold. The new nursery paint bubbled from moisture. Repairs were more expensive than expected. Saad underestimated renovation costs. Dad dipped into savings. No one asked me for advice. Not because they didn't need it, but because asking would require acknowledging what I used to provide. 6 months after I left, Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked around slowly. Smaller space, minimal furniture, organized, intentional. "You're doing well," he observed. "I am," I said. We sat across from each other at my small kitchen table. For the first time, he looked unsure. "I didn't realize how much you were covering," he admitted quietly. That sentence mattered. More than an apology. It was recognition. "I didn't realize how much I was covering either," I replied. Silence stretched between us. Not hostile. Honest. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I agreed. He studied me. Not with disappointment. With recalibration. The hierarchy had shifted. I wasn't beneath the family structure anymore. I was adjacent to it.
Separate.
Independent. Strong, but not available for exploitation. As he stood to leave, he paused. "You've always been strong," he said again. I met his eyes. "No," I corrected gently. "I've learned to be firm." There's a difference. Strength absorbs pressure. Firmness redirects it. After he left, I stood at my window and watched the city move below. I wasn't wealthy. I wasn't dramatically successful. I hadn't bought back the house. But I had done something far more radical. I had stepped out of a role that was never sustainable. And I had survived it. Not just survived. Expanded. For the first time in my adult life, my stability wasn't dependent on being needed. It was built on being respected. And respect starts with yourself. They kicked me out thinking I would scramble. Instead, I built something stronger. Not a bigger house. Not louder success. But a life that didn't require permission. And that changed everything. A year after I moved out, I drove past the old house for the first time. Not accidentally. Intentionally. The paint looked newer. The porch light had been replaced. A stroller sat near the entrance. Life had continued. Of course it had. For months, I avoided that street. Not because I was hurt, but because I wanted to make sure that when I returned, it wouldn't pull anything out of me.
And it didn't.
I parked across the road and watched quietly. The upstairs window, the one that used to be mine, was open. Soft curtains moved with the breeze. I didn't feel displaced. I felt detached. Like someone looking at a former workplace. Important once, but no longer defining. My phone buzzed. It was Dad. "Can you come by? Need to talk." Old reflexes would have sped up my heartbeat. This time, I considered the request calmly. "I can stop by for 30 minutes, I replied. Boundaries aren't dramatic. They're scheduled. When I stepped inside the house, it smelled different. Baby powder instead of lemon cleaner. The furniture was rearranged. Sod looked tired. Miriam thinner. Parenthood had softened their edges. Dad sat at the dining table, the same table where the envelope once waited for me. Only now, there was no envelope. Just him. "We miscalculated," he said without preamble. I waited. He gestured upstairs. "Repairs cost more than expected. Stores slower than ever. We're restructuring again." Restructuring. The word almost made me smile. "And?" I asked calmly. He looked at me carefully. "I thought maybe you'd have advice." Advice. Not money. Not coverage. Advice. That was new. I sat down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the youngest adult in the room. I felt like an equal. "You need to separate personal property from business liability," I said. "Formal leases. Clear contracts. No blurred lines." He nodded slowly. I continued. "And stop assuming family equals unpaid labor." That one landed. Sod shifted in his chair. Miriam looked down. But no one argued. Because they had learned something too. The absence of a safety net forces growth. "You've done well," Dad said quietly. "I've done differently," I corrected. "There's a difference." After the conversation, I stood to leave. No tension. No guilt. No emotional gravity pulling me backward. At the door, Dad spoke again. I should have handled it better. It wasn't a full apology. but it was ownership. I know, I said. And I meant it. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about deciding it doesn't control you anymore. Outside, the afternoon sun hit my face.
Warm. Clear.
A year ago, I left this house feeling displaced. Today, I left feeling anchored. Not to a building. To myself. That's the part no one talks about. Strength isn't loud. It isn't revenge. It isn't buying the house back or proving anyone wrong. Strength is waking up and realizing you no longer measure your worth by how much you sacrifice. It's checking your bank account and seeing growth that wasn't drained by guilt. It's answering family calls without fear. It's knowing you can walk away again, if necessary. A month after that visit, I signed papers on something new. Not a house. Not yet. But an investment property with a colleague from the hospital. Small duplex. Clear contracts. Equal ownership. When I held that pen, I didn't think about revenge. I thought about alignment. About building something without emotional debt attached. My father handed me an eviction notice once. He thought he was removing me from his property. What he actually did was force me to build my own foundation. My name is Alina. I'm 32 years old. I was kicked out by my own father. And I didn't crumble. I recalculated. I restructured. I rebuilt. Not louder. Not bitter. Just stronger. And this time, no one gets to reposition me without my consent.